Here is episode 21 of The Flame of Nuru, an African folktale epic in prose. Episode 21, The Awakening of the Dasha. Far from the mountain's peak, across the forests of Amiri, the dunes of Garima, and the rivers of the lower Orko, shadows began to ripple. Not cast by sun or fire, but by memory, returning to the places it had been banished from. In the sacred groves where ancestors were once called, the drums stopped. In the cities where names were traded for power, mirrors cracked. And in the forgotten caves beneath the earth, the Dasha opened their hallways. At the summit of the mountain, Abeni stood within the newly awakened flame. Its light had changed, no longer gold alone, but now braided with silver, the color of rain. Greater than it's happening, she whispered. They feel it. Tunt stood beside her, his hand clutching the stone feather. The sky above them dimmed, not with storm, but with approaching presence. A sound like thousands of voices weeping in silence swept through the wind. Greater than they're coming, Tun said. And they're angry. The flame pulsed again, and from it emerged a glowing path that led into the air, a bridge of light spiraling downward through the clouds. Greater than what is that? Abeni asked. A voice, now familiar, Nuru, answered from the fire. Greater than it is the path of reckoning. Follow it, and face them not as enemies, but as children of the same flame. Greater than, but be warned, not all shadows wish to remember what they once were. As they descended the light bridge, the world below changed. Where villages once bustled, now stood veiled silhouettes, men and women with faded eyes, whispering stories that looped without end. Greater than they are caught between forgetting and remembering, Abeni murmured. The Dasha were rising, no longer just spirits, but remnants of real people, griots who were silenced, mothers whose names were buried, warriors whose songs were never sung. Tun stopped. One Dasha turned toward him, her face eerily familiar. Greater than Amma? He gasped. The shadow looked at him with empty eyes. Then she spoke his name. Not in voice, but in memory. The Dasha were waking because the world was remembering them. Not just as monsters, but as stories that had been erased. Greater than, we have to go to the Hall of Echoes, Abeni said. That's where the Dasha gather in their full strength. If we can rekindle the last fire pillar there. Greater than, we give them a choice, Tun finished. To return as ancestors, or vanish as ghosts. They moved quickly now. Each step forward brought more shadows, more whispers. Some followed. Some wept. Some tried to pull Abeni into forgotten paths, but the flame between worlds flared, protecting her. At last, on the horizon, rose the great domed stone of the Hall of Echoes, half ruin, half temple. Inside waited the first Dasha. And the final choice. Here is episode 22 of The Flame of Nuru, an African folktale epic in prose. Episode 22, the Hall of Echoes halls stood like a great skull carved into the earth, with wide, broken arches for eyes and a mouth agape in silent lament. Vines had claimed much of its outer walls, yet nothing grew too close to its heart. The air shimmered with heatless fire, and whispers twisted like smoke around Abeni and Tund. The Dasha were waiting. Thousands of them. Shadows in human shape, draped in forgotten stories, faceless yet familiar. They stood still watching. Greater than, do not speak unless spoken to, Abeni warned. They are echoes. And echoes bite if you shout at them. Inside, the Hall of Echoes was circular, its walls carved with scenes too ancient for even griots to remember. Children cradling ash. Kings weeping over empty thrones. Flames rising and fading. At the center was a raised dais of obsidian stone, and upon it stood the first Dasha. He was tall, cloaked in smoke and silence. His presence bent the air. Greater than Abeni of the flame, he said, voice like rusted bells, tongue of the vanishing name. You wake what should not stir. Greater than, we wake what should be heard, Abeni replied. Greater than, do you know what we are? The first Dasha asked. We are the size before the names. The stories denied burial. The songs cut short. He raised his hand and the shadows around the chamber began to chant in lost tongues. Tund stepped forward, holding up the stone feather and the flame between worlds. Greater than, you were silenced. But now we ask, do you want to be remembered or do you wish to remain wrath? The first Dusha's form rippled. For a moment, his smoke peeled back and they saw a man beneath. A storyteller. Eyes weary. Hands stained with charcoal from drawing tales no one would listen to. Greater than, they called me Madhu, he said quietly. I told truths too bitter to swallow. So they buried me with my own tongue. Abeni's voice trembled. Greater than, then let your tongue be flame. Let the world hear you again. She stepped onto the dais and placed the flame between worlds at its center. The stone feather ignited not with destruction, but with light woven of memory. The hollow trembled. The shadows flinched. Then they began to sing. Not a song of vengeance, but of remembrance. Each Dasha shimmered as their names returned, names once lost to time and shame. One by one, they stepped into the light and vanished peacefully, becoming ancestral spirits once more. Some resisted, turning into cinders and fleeing, but most chose the path of peace. The first Dasha looked at Abeni and Tund. Greater than, you did not burn us away. You let us burn through. He placed his hands upon the flame and closed his eyes. Greater than, I remember now, I am more than rage. And then he was gone. Only the flame remained, no longer between worlds, but of both. Abeni turned to Tund, tears streaming down her face. Greater than, we did not defeat them, we healed them. Tund nodded. Greater than, now the world must learn to do the same. Outside, the skies cleared. Children of the village would later say they saw flames dance in the air like spirits rejoicing. And when the drums were struck again that night, they answered back. Here is episode 23 of The Flame of Nuru, an African folktale epic in prose. Episode 23, the naming of the flame. As dawn rose with colors the villagers had never seen, amber folded into indigo, with streaks of firelight that shimmered like storytelling ink across the sky. In the village of Ituama, where Abeni was born, the talking drums beat not for war, but for welcoming. They said the mountain had spoken. They said shadows had wept. They said the flame had been reborn. Abeni and Tund descended from the mountain with a flame between worlds and a bronze gourd carved with spirals. Its light no longer pulsed with pain, it glowed warm and steady, like the heartbeat of an old friend returning. Children ran to meet them at the edge of the forest, singing old lullabies once forgotten. Old women wept. Men beat their chests not in grief, but in remembrance. Greater than, we have brought it back, Abeni said softly. But now it needs a name. The elders of Ituama gathered beneath the moon tree, where names had once been given to newborns and warriors. Each elder touched the gourd and listened. And from each came a name, greater than Elikar, because it calls even the wind to remember. Greater than Simbi, the echo that heals. Greater than Okaora, flame that gives life. But it was the oldest of them all, the blind great Mama Doma, who rose with trembling hands. She placed her ear near the gourd and whispered, greater than Nuru. Silence followed. A warm breeze stirred the leaves of the moon tree. Then the flame inside the gourd flared, as if in agreement. Greater than, the flame has chosen, Mama Doma said. Its name is Nuru. Greater than light that remembers. A feast was held. Not for victory, but for return. As firewood cracked and palm wine flowed, the villagers told stories once forbidden. They spoke names once lost. They sang the lullabies of those who had passed into dust. And when the moon reached its peak, the flame of Nuru rose into the sky, dancing with stars. Tund stood beside Abeni, watching. Greater than, do you think they're at peace now? He asked. Greater than, I think they're listening, Abeni answered. Greater than, and I think we've given them back their voices. In distant lands, where spirits still wandered, they felt the change. In dreams across the world, ancestors whispered again. And somewhere, in the last cave of the Dusha, one final ember flickered, waiting to be named.
Here is episode 24 of The Flame of Nuru, an African folktale epic in prose. Episode 24, When Spirits Sing Again. Night after the naming of the flame, a wind passed through Aduama, soft at first, then rising into a melody. Not a storm. Not a whisper. But a song. The villagers awoke to find their ancestral drums beating on their own, echoing rhythms no living hand remembered. From the shrine of old griots to the resting stones of unnamed graves, voices rose not in fear, but in harmony. Greater than the spirits were singing again. Abeni stood at the center of the village square, the flame of Nuru held high. Its light shone upon faces marked by time and struggle, and yet every eye glistened with awe. Greater than they are not gone, Abeni said. They walk with us now through memory, through name, through song. The people responded not with cheers, but with a quiet, holy stillness, the kind that comes when the soul finally feels seen. In the crowd, a child pointed toward the old tamarind tree. A figure stood there. Half light, half shadow. It was Tun's mother, Amma. Not flesh, but not only spirit either. She looked at her son and nodded once, slowly, as if to say, "Greater than you have carried me well." Tun knelt. He did not cry. He smiled. From that night onward, the people of Iduama began to build anew. The broken memory stones were mended. Forgotten songs were relearned. A new school was opened beneath the moon tree, not for war or wealth, but for storytelling. Children were taught not only how to count, but how to remember. To call their ancestors by name. To speak gently to silence. To let grief sing, and let fire heal. And in the center of the village, the flame of Nuru burned, not to consume, but to connect. Travelers came from distant lands to see it. Some brought tears. Others brought tales. All left with something rekindled inside. For the first time in generations, the veil between the living and the lost was not a wall, but a bridge. And when the wind passed through Iduama again, the people no longer hid from it. They danced. Here is episode 25 of The Flame of Nuru, an African folktale epic in prose. Episode 25, The Keeper of Quiet. Nemes. Beyond the joyful drums of Iduama, in the farthest reaches of the Abun Valley, where even birds flew low and silence wore its own scent, a woman with silver braids sat beside a pool that never rippled. Her name was Eric, the keeper of quiet names. She did not speak much, nor did the trees around her. Her task was sacred, to hold the names too painful to be spoken aloud, names of betrayed sons, of women buried without rites, of warriors whose songs ended mid-stanza. Names the world had swallowed and tried to forget. But on this day, the pool stirred. And from its surface rose a faint humming of spirits. Eric opened her eyes. The flame of Nuru had reached her. Greater than so, she murmured, her voice like rustling leaves, the children have remembered. She reached into the pouch beside her and pulled out a scroll of dry skin. Written on it were names. Too old for memory. Too raw for song. But ready. She stood. Slowly. With dignity worn like a mantle. And began walking toward Iduama. Back in the village, the children were gathered around Tund, who had taken to telling stories at dusk beneath the moon tree. That evening, he told the tale of Ayani the flame carver, a man who etched fire into stone to remember his people's truths. As he spoke, the flame of Nuru beside him pulsed, not just golden now, but laced with a deep violet hue, the color of grief turned gentle. Greater than what does it mean when the light turns purple? One girl asked. Abeni turned, sensing a change. And then she felt it, greater than someone is coming, she whispered. Someone carrying the unspoken. At the edge of Iduama, Eric appeared. She did not speak. She only held out the scroll. Abeni stepped forward. As their hands met, the flame flared with sudden intensity, then stilled into a quiet, steady glow. Greater than these, Eric finally said, are the last of the quiet names. Will you give them song? Tun stepped beside Abeni. Greater than we will. One by one. Slowly, if needed. But truly. That night, the names were read aloud by candlelight. Each one spoken brought a wind, a hush, and a moment of warmth on every face. As the last name echoed into the air, the flame of Nuru rose into a spiral above the village, no longer just light, but a language. A promise. That no name, however painful, would ever again be left behind.